Welcome to the Coach's Idea podcast. I am your host, Marvin Okello. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which the Canadian Sport and Student Athletics office and training facility is located is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The purpose of the podcast is to share the stories and lived experiences for the many diverse coaches across Atlantic Canada in hopes that others can learn from listening to them. I'm pleased to welcome Nicole Kuzmich and Simon Taylor, who both work as certified mental performance consultants at CSIA. I met Simon last year while working with Halifax Wanderers and recently met Nicole when I joined Canadian Sport and Student Athletics. Though Nicole and Simon have the same job title, they have very different lived experiences that have led them to where they are today. Nicole and Simon have different educations backgrounds, but are both certified mental performance consultants. Welcome, Nicole and Simon. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, nice to be here.
It's my pleasure. And I understand that, Simon, you recently did a podcast as well with Sport Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I did. So it's good to be doing another one.
Awesome. Well, hopefully there's some different topics here discussed, but just a quick plug on what were some of the topics you discussed on that podcast before we jump into this one.
So the premise of that one was just understanding a little bit about athletes transition out of sport. So whether that's by choice, because like their university career is coming to an end and they're like getting a job and join the working world and don't have time to compete at the level anymore that they're used to, or maybe it's because of an injury. And so just kind of diving deep into like, what does that look like? How does it feel? And how do we kind of like navigate those situations?
That's great, Simon. Thanks for telling us about the podcast, and I look forward to hearing that when it comes out. This is podcast number 3. We had guest Dave Green on podcast number 2, and it was great to hear his perspective. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your experiences as mental performance consultants. Nicole, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today as a mental performance consultant?
Yeah, of course. Always a loaded question. I feel like it has a lot of train tracks going in parallel opposite lines that don't always make sense. But I think the biggest thing
before you do, Nicole Kuzmich was an international figure skater who worked hard to reach the peak competitive streams of her sport, but will tell you that she was very privileged to be able to reach the highest levels in figure skating. But with that being said, not all her experiences were positive, and that is what has led to her transitioning to a mental performance consultant to support youth in sport. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Sweet. Thanks. Yeah. So I think my life has always revolved around sport. It's what I started doing when I was 3. I got into figure skating when I was 3 because my mom vowed that she would never have a kid that couldn't skate on school skate day. So my career in skating started selfishly due to my lovely mother wanting me to not be that kid that couldn't skate. But started skating when I was 3. I had an X factor, as the coaches would tell me, and they picked me out when I was 3 years old and put me right into that competitive stream when I was pretty young. I went to my first junior worlds when I was 14. I did 4 in a row. Once I hit that age of, you're too old for junior, I went up to senior, competed on the senior Grand Prix circuit for a year or 2, went to senior worlds, the University Olympic Games in Almaty, Kazakhstan. And then I retired from sport unwillingly, much like maybe Simon talked about on his podcast. I transitioned out of sport involuntarily, not up to my decision, which led for a whole bundle of mess for about 5 years after, but absolutely loved what I did, wouldn't trade it for everything. And I think that really transitioned into my work of mental performance, because I find a lot of love and passion working with youth in sport, because for a majority of my career, I was a high performance athlete, before adolescence, going through puberty as a young woman in sport, and it was really hard. And so I think I take that lived experience and I transition over into my work and helping youth and adolescents kind of gain those voices and learn from their experiences in a lot more positive, adaptive way.
That's awesome. So, 3 points for me to extrapolate out of that. First of all, shout out your mom. Thank you for encouraging Nicole to get into the sport. And second, the lived experience and being able to be an athlete a lot of times is really good base and a good foundation when you're speaking with other athletes, and then being able to go, oh, she competed at the highest level. I should listen to her and respect her because that's where I want to get to. So I think that's always really important when you're talking with athletes. And then third, it's great to hear you've competed at such a high level, which gives you that, international experience as well, which a lot of people who only make it on their local team or maybe their provincial team and never get to that international stage where things get even more complicated with different countries having different policies and different rules and different ways of approaching the sport. So that's really great to hear that you have that very balanced background, and then combining that all with your education, I'm sure, is something that you talk about a lot, especially the education piece. It's something we'll dive into later in the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely was hard being a student athlete, but such a lived experience that I think it was a big talking point with the kids that I consult now. Like, balancing academics and athletics is challenging, but can be done if done with intention.
It's awesome. And what are the age ranges of the youth that you work with?
Yeah, my youngest is an 8-year-old. So earlier we were talking about, those crazy 5-year-olds running around the gym. My youngest is 8. And, I go all the way up to, I think my oldest is 36 or something like that. But my sweet age range that I really enjoy working with build a lot of I enjoy working with all ages, but my prime age range that I enjoy really working with is really that 10, 12 age range into like 16, 18. Like, I really enjoy that age.
Which makes sense from past that adolescent stage where they're really starting to actually understand their minds and bodies and what's going on, having those thoughts, those questions, puberty starting to come into play. So I'm sure that, not only do the parents appreciate you supporting these youth, but I'm sure the youth really enjoy having somebody who's not their parent supporting them as well.
Yeah. And I love being goofy, which is like how you kind of get to a 10-year-old's heart sometimes. You got to be a little goofy to get a laugh. And once you get a laugh, you're like, all right, I'm in. Like, I got this.
100%. I think that's a characteristic we all share, really, Simon included. And I think when you're working with youth, you have to have that little bit of goofiness to relate with them and not seem like another authoritative figure that's just like a boring person they're going to be speaking to. And then on that, shout out to Evan in our office, who's always that lighthearted guy, making sure that we're all smiling and having a good time. You always need one of those people in the office. And I'd like to say actually that we have multiple in our office. So it's been great being a part of this team. And thanks for joining, Nicole.
Thanks.
Simon. So Simon comes from a golf background and has competed internationally and in the NCAA. Simon experienced nerves and anxiety in his own sport career that led him to diving into the mental performance field. Simon is known for not only spreading awareness, but also advocating that we should address mental health, not just on the bad days, but also on the good days. Simon, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here on this Friday afternoon.
Definitely. So Simon, we tried to put together a little golf tournament when we were working together at the Wanderers last year, that it never happened. So hopefully we can make that happen this year. But tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today as a consultant for Canadian Sport Institute Land.
Yeah. So actually, similar to Nicole, my dad introduced me to golf because he is actually a golf coach. And so born in Germany, raised by parents, and I started golf when I was about 2.5, 3 years old. I would just have these like plastic clubs of the size of me, and I'd just be like doing air swings around everywhere. And I'd always insist on joining my dad to work. And he was like, all right, if you want to come. And he was happy for me to like tag along. And yeah, it kind of just like had this natural progression where I just fell in love with the sport and loved doing it. And my dad coached me. And it got to the point where, like, as a junior, I was fairly successful, like winning state championships and stuff like that in Germany, and competing international events, and to the point where I actually got like a really almost like a full ride to go to to compete at D1 in the NCAA in the States. And I thought that was like my golden ticket. And I was like, brilliant, this is it. I always make a joke when I meet teams that I'm like, well, I'm standing here today. And so obviously that didn't quite go as planned. Although even if I did make it pro, who knows, maybe I'd still be sitting here today having this conversation with the two of you. But all jokes aside, like, it just didn't work out as I had hoped for. And so what I decided to do was just, I as a result, like, to back up a little bit there, like, I moved to the US thinking this was my golden ticket and my game would have progressed naturally and they would all be great. my game actually took a huge hit. And so like my game got to the place where I struggled so much that I actually didn't like the sport anymore and I didn't enjoy being there. And so I needed to transfer after a couple of years. And then I finished my degree at another university in the States. And then I realized towards the end that like, I want to understand what happened. And so that really led me to dive into this idea of like sports psychology and getting my master's and PhD in that field to just kind of learn a little bit about like, what, what was this about? And so I find myself nowadays really driven by this idea of like having that lived experience of being an athlete and falling short because it was on the mental side where I struggled because I sound ancient when I just, but back in my days, it was one of those things that like you either have it or you don't mentally. And like people still, a lot of like coaches, old school coaches still view it the same way. And so I guess in that regard, I didn't have it. So I decided to like study and like understand that experience. And now I have the joy and the privilege of working with all these wonderful athletes and coaches and teams in kind of supporting through these challenges, these situations from a viewpoint of, I know what you're going through because I've been there, but also I have the educational backing to say, here's things you can do to kind of hopefully sidestep these situations that I faced as an athlete when I was your age.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I did go on your website, tailoredmindset.com, and, one paragraph that really jumped out at me, you kind of call to action. If you're wanting to move past the hurdles of your mind that keep you from performing or thinking strategically when it counts, and if you want to learn skills that will help you beyond your athletic career, let's talk. Like that to me speaks volumes in terms of what you can offer athletes, and all athletes, regardless of what sport you're in, deal with those situations where whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's I didn't get enough sleep and am I going to be able to compete? Whether is my diet good? And there's such a correlation there between the mind and the body. So it's really great to have folks like yourselves educating us on that relationship and, how to increase our physical performance by taking care of our mental performance.
Well said.
So, before we get into the nitty gritty of it, I want to hear a little bit more about you as sports fans, right? So first, Simon, I want to hear, what is your favorite sporting moment as a fan of sports?
Being a big fan, I must say, so all the golf fans listening to this hopefully will know what I'm talking about. It was the year 2019. It was April and the Masters was on and Tiger Woods won the Masters after like dealing with yet another career ending injury. And he just kept on coming back and kept on coming back. And like there was that injury where it was basically like, this was the final draw. Like he's done. And he came back in 2019 and won Masters. And it was just, yeah, like even just talking about it gives me goosebumps because he's just, when you see like this, they have like these pictures online where it's like all the surgeries he's had from like head to toe. And you're like, how is he able to still walk, yet alone like compete at the highest level? It's a wonderful feat. And so that for me as a golfer is like by far my number one experience moment as a fan.
That's amazing. And honestly, Tiger Woods is such an inspiration to many golfers around the world. But for me, he's also the epitome of the struggles of athletes at that highest level, especially racialized athletes. A black athlete who, is one of the only in his sport who has reached the legendary status that he has. And it's crazy to see the struggles because when you're that famous, when you've got, the Nikes and all the sponsorships attached and you're on commercials and everything, you now become, a leader that you have to act a certain way. And there's pressures that go with that, obviously, mental pressures. So it's really was great to see him overcome and show that resiliency that, his father taught him when he was younger and especially coming out of all the negative things that we saw happen with him, with his mental health really deteriorating. So that's a great moment, Simon. And thanks for sharing that. I almost forgot, honestly, because since COVID, it seems like time is just like a concept.
Yes. He'll be back next week. The Masters are on again. And as of right now, he's meant to be competing in his first event also. Who knows? Maybe 2024 is the year he does it again.
That's awesome. And honestly, golf is one of those sports that I had the stigma that it was only for rich people. I mean, it's only the last couple of years that I have actually started going out. There's a driving range just up the street from me. So that was my first taste of it. And then Dave Green actually got me out to a fun sports tournament for a fundraiser. And I fell in love with it, man. And now like I want to get out golfing as much as possible. And for all those who think that golf is only for rich people, it's not. It's very affordable, especially here in Halifax. Links at Montague is one of the really affordable courses. And really, once you get some clubs, like the fees aren't as much as what I thought it was. I thought every golf day was a couple $100, but once you get your initial clubs and all that, it's really not that bad. So I highly recommend
It can
checking
be
it out.
expensive if you lose a lot of golf balls.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the learning curve expense, unfortunately. But I actually hit the ground running. My very first tournament. It was actually that Fun Sports one. It was best ball. And we played 9 holes and we used my ball 5 of the 9 holes, ironically, even though I was playing with 2 golfers. So
Brilliant.
you never know. You could be a natural, and that's why it's great to have some of these, come try sports and whatnot, like Fun Sports does with the kids, to let them try golf and break down some of those stigmas.
Yeah.
So Nicole, what is your favorite sports moment as a fan?
Well, I don't have a date or a year like Simon, but I definitely, it's ingrained in my head for sure. So when I was an athlete, I competed for the Czech Republic for the last 5 years of my sporting experience. And my skating partner, I was in ice dance, so I had a skating partner, and his name is Alex. His family was from the USSR and then eventually moved their way over to the Czech Republic, which is where he was born. And so we competed for the Czech Republic because he was from there and I already had an EU passport. And so Alex moved from Prague to skate with me in Toronto. And so he lived with my family for a couple of years, which is a whole other crazy dynamic. But I remember this moment like it was yesterday, and thinking about it makes me laugh because it really paints me in a bad picture, but it doesn't matter because it makes me laugh now. It was whatever year in the finals of the junior tournament for hockey that Canada was playing Russia. And obviously it could be a million years because I feel like that's a very common matchup, obviously. But it was whatever year in the later 2000s, maybe like anywhere between 2012 and 2015. And
this is
Alex,
men's?
It was men's. Yeah, it was men's. And it was the gold medal game. It was in the room. It was my family and Alex and myself. And my dad is a diehard hockey fan. I grew up watching hockey more than skating. I probably even still like hockey more than skating. And diehard fan. And my dad comes in, he's got like the Canadian flag on a wall and he's decked out in Canada gear and he's just so pumped. And I'm like so pumped to watch this game with my dad. And Alex comes in and he's dressed in like, brings the Russian flag in, puts it on the opposite wall, comes in with like his Russian like jersey on. And then I was like, oh my God, I just truly don't know where this is going to go. Like I'm going to lose it. Anyway, the whole game was just going over it, and it was a tight game. Like it was one of the tightest games ever that I've watched. And we get down, it's tied, and Alex is just screaming like every like good pass, turnover, goal, point, doesn't matter. Like he's going ham, and I couldn't take it. I was like, oh my God, I think I might be violent. I was like, this isn't it. Like, he's got to stop because me and my dad are like very like not like we're just chilling and he's going nuts. And it was just getting so under my skin. And I was like, why is this bothering me? Like, I don't understand. And so it bugged me so much that I left. I think it was OT. I left and went to my room and listened to the rest of the game on the radio. And it's my favorite sports memory just because it showed me like how deep sport culture is. Mm-hmm. Did I know anybody on that team? Absolutely not. Nothing except like it was my nation against Alex's nation. And it just taught me so much about like, national identity and how much you identify with your culture and your nation. And it's just one of my favorite moments because I had to finish it in my room under the pillow and we won, which was really great for my ego. But, we had a really hard time. And then the next day we got to the rink and he looked at me and he was like, that was a lot, eh? And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. And it was just a really funny, good moment. And that's probably my favorite. I don't know if there's why that is, but it just really, really makes me laugh to look back on for sure as a fan, just like super fan to the max for no reason.
That's awesome. And if from a quick Google search, it seems like it was 2012 was the year.
Right in. Definitely. Yeah.
I thought for sure it was going to be a figure skating story, for
Oh
me,
no.
like I thought it was going to be like Elvis Stoico or something.
No, I got many of those, but this one was the only time I've gotten heated, like truly heated for no reason. And I was like, I am ashamed, but I love it for myself. This is good.
Fair enough. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's when Nicole's passion was ignited.
Yeah, 2012.
Now, in terms of an athlete, what is your favorite moment when you were an athlete?
Yeah, lots of them. Truly can probably say I had a lot more lows as an athlete, unfortunately, than highs. I think my favorite memory ever was in my European championship. So it was in Ostrava, Czech Republic. And so like we were the home team. And there was a little before we competed, there's this line of like thousands of little kids wanting to get my autograph with Alex. And we're just sitting at the front table with like stacks of like our pictures to sign. And there's just like thousands of little kids just waiting. And it was so sweet. But that's not what I cared about. I cared and I cried when it happened that my sweet mom flew all the way out there to watch me and I didn't know. And she waited in that line for an hour to come see me, to get my autograph, to just support me. And I think that's my favorite moment as an athlete, like that my sweet mom just waited in that line for me and didn't come to the front and like, that's my kid. Like I paid for that. You know what I mean? Like there was none of that. She just like waited in the line and came and I was like, Mom? And she's like, yeah, can I have your autograph? And I was like, oh my God, like you're the sweetest lady of all time. So not only did she put me in sport, but then she was there to see one of my last competitions too. So
What's your mom's name again?
Judy.
Shout out Judy #2.
Yeah.
What a legend.
Yeah, that's definitely it for sure.
That's incredible. And I mean, I'm sure there's so many of us, in sport who sometimes it wasn't the team that we were playing that really inspired us. It was sometimes who was in the crowd, whether it was mom and dad or your siblings or, boyfriend, girlfriend, grandma, whoever it might be. So I love that. That's a great moment there. Thank you, Nicole. So jumping right into it, because you did mention, that you did have quite a few negative experiences as an athlete, but I did forget actually Simon's moment as an athlete before I jump into that.
Yeah. I have a bit of full circle moment actually when I think about my favorite moments. It's almost like a two-parter, which in the sense it will make sense when I'm finished talking. And so the first part, which was definitely like the low point of my golf career, it was the end of my university career. So like my first 2 years, I really struggled. Then I moved to another university and I got a little bit better again. And I actually had a chance to qualify for nationals individually because I was playing well enough. It was a 3-day tournament. I was leading after 2 days. I was in control of this whole tournament. It was basically just, I was going to win this thing. And then like, I kind of choked, I guess is the best way to put it. Like I went from cruise control to everything went sideways. And I remember the 18th hole I went from like a huge lead to like trailing. And then I managed to catch up and tie again. And in the 18th hole, I had like a short putt to tie and go into a playoff, and I missed that. And that was my final tournament as a college golfer. And I remember that just was it still causes me headache to this day. And that was in 2015. And since then, like my golf game just really, that's where I started falling out of love and struggling with my identity as a golfer and whatnot. But last year, after having moved to Canada for a few in 2019 and like getting back into it again slowly, like last year I started taking it seriously again. And last year I actually won a tournament, an invitational tournament out here in Nova Scotia. And that was like a full circle moment where like I was able to come through and it just felt like that I was in cruise control and then I actually pulled it off. And that was my first since my college experience. And
what
so I walked
course
away
was
being
that tournament at?
Me?
What course was the tournament at here in Nova Scotia?
It was the Amherst Invitational.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, I managed to pull off the victory there, one shot win. And I knew it going down the final stretch. I knew it and I was able to hold on to it. And just coming off the course and just like, it was a full circle moment that just was almost like this huge weight had been lifted off me by finally being able to like come back again after that. So that's my moment.
That was your Tiger moment.
There it is. Full circle again.
Call it Tiger moment.
Your own personal tiger moment.
Okay, sure.
We got to live vicariously through our heroes sometimes, right?
Oh, it's too funny.
No, that's awesome. Thank you, Simon. So yeah, no, jumping back in, and admittedly, as you guys both know, as both an athlete and as a human being, something I struggle with is insomnia. So there are moments where, I'll mess up a little bit on the order or whatnot, but those are the things that it's been even great having you guys as coworkers to support me on and coming up with things to, combat those things and make sure that I'm still able to function at a high level, both in my work and my personal life. So that's something that I personally struggle with is insomnia. So I'm coming off of one of those low nights of sleep, but it's one of those things we all have to deal with. But jumping back to Nicole, you said you had some negative experiences in sports. So one of the things that we want to talk about is safeguarding athletes in sport. This is both coaches, parents, teammates, and everyone who really contributes to the environment around the athletes. What can you tell me a little bit about what that responsibility is for safeguarding athletes in sport?
Yeah, for sure. Safeguarding is definitely a word that takes many forms for many different people, depending on what environment you're in or who you are, or even what country you're in. I know like safeguarding looks quite differently in some other countries in terms of even the language they use to safeguard an athlete. I mean, it's just like such a diverse topic, and so many people are ultimately responsible for a child or for youth or for an athlete. And sometimes I feel like we put the onus on the athlete when a lot of time they have some power and autonomy stripped from them, where they can't guard themselves and they can't keep themselves safe in the environment that they're in. And I know in my master's, I did a good project on Russian figure skating in terms of some of the abuse and toxic culture that was going on in there. I mean, I was reading a lot of literature, finding out, different systems of theories to work. And I came across a quote that was from, I think it was the lawyer that was doing some of those Boston cases in terms of like the abuse that was going on in the Catholic Church. But this quote just like stood out for like what I think safeguarding means to me and means to a community as well. And the quote was, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one. And to me, that just like sparks such thought, really. It's just
it's a really
highlighting.
profound statement.
Yeah, it really just hits on the nail on the head there in terms of like the bystander effect. Okay, like, so the abuse is allegedly going on, let's just say, between one coach and one athlete, but it's never that. Like, other athletes see things. Those athletes make little comments to other people, to parents, to other coaches, to teachers at school. They don't even have to know where the kid trains or connection, but those things come out and words are said and actions are taken. And it just really speaks to ultimately like the duty to report and the duty to ask more questions.
Yeah, I really like it because it really adds an accountability piece to the original statement that everyone knows, or that quote, it takes a village to raise a child. But this is really a continuation of that, and an accountability piece towards, hey, yeah, it takes a village to raise a child, but we can also do harm to that child if we don't honor that responsibility for every child in the community for us to contribute. That's things like neighborhood watch. That's things like, in sport, it's more specific, and it's seeing a coach, leaving with a player and, they're one-on-one and breaking things like the rule of two, and some of these things start off as very small, but can end up as really big situations. So I really like the accountability piece around, yes, we all have responsibility in raising a child and making sure that they're not ending up in situations of abuse or neglect. And, the term safe sport comes up a lot when you talk about, abuse and things like that. So Simon, can you shed some light a little bit on what is the meaning behind safe sport and the purpose of that?
Yes, I could talk a little bit about that. But before I talk about it, I really want to give a shout out to our safe sport lead through Sport Nova Scotia, which is Ilana Lieberman, because my whole knowledge with safe sport and my interest in diving deep into this area and learning so much about it has all stemmed from, or the majority of it stemmed from her sitting down and talking to me. So she is nothing short of amazing and is absolutely and so yeah.
I want to add to that as well. I've gotten the pleasure of meeting Elena both when I was at the Wanderers, when I was the lead for the diversity committee, and we're working with fan safety and coming up with processes for restorative processes for dealing with fans, and not just the classic, hey, you're banned for 3 games and no accountability. And that's going to be a word I'm going to bring up a lot, but it's that accountability piece to them to actually show some learning and some growth behind it before we determine if we even want people to come back after a ban, or maybe we're just better off not having that fan around anymore for the sake of everybody else's safe environment while watching and enjoying the matches. So big shout out to Elena. Love the work that she does with both, the restorative processes, but also with the athletes like Luke Berryman, who's one of her leads for the athlete program. So yeah, big shout out to Elena.
Yeah. So for me, like when I think of safe sport, you kind of touched on it there with this idea of like, it's not stop banning when bad things happen. And like that is definitely part of it. It's like punishing bad things, but really like the viewpoint that I like looking at it through, and it's all about this idea of like, let's not just focus on all the bad stuff. Obviously that's a huge thing that needs to be dealt with, but it's also about like, let's create these like environments that are like welcoming, inclusive, accessible, and participate in them. So it's just whoever you are, you can participate in this environment and enjoy yourself. That's really it. Like it's and like not experience any kind of harm. So it's the absence of harm that we're trying to obviously like achieve, but we're also trying to like do more than just not harm anyone, if that makes sense.
It's like being proactive rather than reactive, if I could summarize it.
Sure.
Yeah, in a way.
Cool.
Yeah. I also want to highlight and jump in there, Marvin, a little bit about, I think it's really common for society and coaches and athletes and IST members to think of, safe sport means abuse, and abuse might just mean sexual or physical harassment or neglect. That's true, but we're also looking at a broader spectrum of emotional and psychological maltreatment and abuse. And all those areas we like to maybe say are a little bit more gray zone because it's a little bit harder to define and see and understand, but they're just as impactful and they're just as devastating on athletes as well. And so it's always like, it's not just physical, it's not just sexual. You really got to think broader, that where emotional, psychological maltreatment and abuse is just as prevalent, and if not, maybe even more prevalent in sport.
100%. And I mean, for me, this word safe sport is actually very transparent, and it encompasses so much. That's why I think it's a great term. It's everything under the umbrella of being safe within sport, and within the inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility lines, like that means everyone participating in sport being able to feel seen, heard, and understood. And those 3 are important for everybody. And because I get that question sometimes. People are like, what does, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility mean ultimately in sport? Like, why is there so many of these roles popping up? And it's because our roles is really to work with people who are in safe sport, people who are in mental performance, people who are in accessibility, people who are in kind of tying it all in to really create that overall safe space for athletes, coaches, fans, everybody to be involved in. And it's something that, would you guys say, and I'll start with Simon, would you say that is it only the coach's responsibility to create a safe environment for athletes to navigate their way through sport? Or are there other people who are crucial to supporting any given athlete?
Yeah, it's everyone's responsibility. Like whoever you are, if you're involved in this sport to some extent, you play a role. Like that's not to say that like if you're a spectator, your role is just as like impactful as like as you're a head coach who sees these people 24/7. Not what I'm saying, but like everyone who's involved plays a role to some extent, and that varies from individual to individual. But it's funny that Nicole mentioned this idea. There's a lot of grayness in there because like Ilana and I have actually done multiple safe sport presentations for coaches where we've kind of tied together like my research that I've done with it, which is heavily focused on like coach research and the impact it has on athletes' experiences, and then Ilana's background within safe sport and sport law and such, and come up with this presentation that like it's called the idea of just like beyond the gray zone. So really just understanding like how coaches create an environment that is focused on safe sport principles But at the same time, it doesn't exclude performance, because that's what we see more oftentimes, a little bit of like, not fear, but like when we talk about like well-being and safe and all these kinds of things, I've really like not really come across a coach that's been like, I don't believe in this. Like pretty much everyone that I've spoken to about this is like, yeah, this is super important. But then there's a little thing that's like, yeah, but what about performance? Like, are we talking about this at the expense of performance? It's like, no. It actually all like goes in hand with each other. Like we can have performing athletes that are also safe and also enjoying themselves. So that was a little bit of a side note there, but I just wanted to highlight that point around the grayness, that like this stuff is challenging because there is so much grayness here. It's not all like straightforward and cookie cutter situations. A lot of it is gray. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, for me, a lot of these conversations are just diving deeper into issues that are starting to become a lot more prevalent in sport, especially post-COVID. Like, locally here, and for example, there's the basketball scene where, a lot of basketball leagues stopped allowing parents and families to come watch games because they weren't creating a safe sport environment. They were heckling, they were, even putting pressure on their own children, you do better, yada, yada. And like, putting a negative connotation around the environment for those athletes to just play the game, and
yeah.
And that's one part of it. There's the issue with officials not wanting to even be officials anymore. So the sign-up rate for officials has gone down because of the abuse that they're taking from both coaches who are yelling at them, fans who are yelling at them, parents who are yelling at them, players who are yelling at them. So it really is just everybody, who's going to either be working at a sport facility, who's going to be playing at a sport facility, or even spectating during the sport. Sometimes it's even the people who are helping the people get there, whether it's the bus driver, whether it's the, you know what I mean? It's everybody who comes into contact with the athletes. And for me, that's why it's really important for coaches to surround themselves with those people who are going to help them, the mental performance consultants, the physiotherapists, the, even working with the parents to have hard conversations around what their involvement with their kids' lives in sport looks like. Because sometimes parents are actually the biggest hurdle for athletes, and why a lot of athletes quit sport.
We definitely, I've done some sessions with parents, and I'm pretty sure Nicole has also done, like her and I have had quite a few conversations about sport parents and how sport parents can be wonderful, and there's so many wonderful experiences. It's always like Nicole's mom, like my dad, but then you have these sport parents that are like U9 games, like threatening the ref and whatnot. You're just like, what is like, going on here?
Yeah, it's crazy. And like even talking about your parents, like I went from being 11 and loving my mom and dad coming to the games all the time, and I think for like a 2-year period, I scored every single game where my mom and dad came to watch, because for me, it was that added motivation. I have to do well for them. And then at a certain point, it flipped. And, my father actually became a negative pressure on me because he was expecting me too much. Now that I'm, on the provincial team, he's, you should be national, you should be pro. And, because he had that expectation, he wasn't letting me just be a kid and just play and not have all these additional pressures. So it's really important for parents to not add stresses to athletes. Is there anything you'd like to elaborate on that, Nicole?
Yeah, let your kid be a kid for as long as possible. Like letting your kid go to, I have so this comes off so many times in my sessions. Like parents are like, should I let my kid go to a sleepover the weekend before a tournament? Like, should I let my kid go trick-or-treating? And like, it's like, yeah, man, like let them eat too much candy and throw up. I'm just kidding. Don't let them do that. But like, just let them be a kid. Like, let them do, like, that's not going to harm their performance. It's going to increase enjoyment and relatedness and well-being. And that's going to increase their performance, right? Like, yeah, let them be
allowing them to make mistakes. Like, because how often would you say that like you actually learn more through mistakes than through successes?
Like more. Like make mistake, like probably, like how many times have I done something good and then thought about it like 0 times? Like it's all the mistakes we make, and then we're like, okay, like let me rethink about that. But yeah, let your kid be a kid. They're only going to be a kid for so long, and then the tax man comes before you know it, and we're done. Like we're not kids anymore. So just let them do it. I mean, there's a lot. Simon can speak more to it better than I can, but there's so much literature on like early specialization is actually worse for your kid than diversification, right, Simon? Like that, there's a lot of literature on that in terms of like, let your kid sample a lot of sports, try a lot of different things, build competencies in a lot of different areas, and then specialize into a sport when we're getting into later mid-adolescence. Like it's what Simon swinging a golf club at 3 and me like learning to skate at 3, like great, but it doesn't mean that we were going to be any better than a kid that maybe started a couple years later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I echo exactly what Nicole says, like this idea of like letting the kids be kids and have fun. Like, yeah, you're not going to you're not elite at a U12 level. Like this idea of like a U12 elite camp is just, it's like, sure, you've put that label on this, you can charge more money and say this is a high performance program, but like really like let me kids, because like how many kids, I'll ask like Nicole, have you seen and spoken with, and I speak from experience as well, that once they reach 18, they're like, I'm done with this sport and I'm never doing it again. Hate it. Yeah. And now I actually hate my whole relationship with sport and I struggle because of like, I was forced, I didn't get a choice and all these kinds of things. I had to skip trick-or-treating. I had to skip sleepovers. There's no opportunity for me to have fun. And now sport is a chore that just brings me so much dissatisfaction. And like Nicole said, like if you're having fun, you will be more motivated. And if you're more motivated, you'll play better. And you'll walk away saying, I want to do this again. And if you mess up and you're able to enjoy yourself, you'll come back and be like, I messed up. So what? It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't have to be all this like shame and blame and high performance 24/7. It's just nonsense. So as you can see, Nicole and I get very animated over.
Yeah, we do.
For sure. I mean, it's about balance, right? Like for me, it's summarizing it about balance, letting them be a kid as much as possible while, yeah, sure, if they start to thrive in their sport, allow them higher opportunities to play on a more competitive level, maybe play an age level up, but still allow them to be them. So this for me comes up a lot where I get parents asking me, my kid's under 12, they're 10 years old, and that's the age group they're supposed to be in, but they're not being challenged enough. They're dominating this age group. So I want to put them in U14. What do you think? And for me, the answer is different for every kid because some kids are ready for that jump socially and some kids are not. It's not just about competing on the field. It's what are those conversations in the locker room going to look like now that they're in a different age group? What are even on-field conversations, their ability to deal with kids who are pushing them physically and mentally, because as you get older, the chirps get worse in a lot of ways in sports. So it's finding that balance to let them protect them from a lot of those things and being exposed to that too quickly, but also allowing them to thrive in their out of sport environment where they're able to go to that sleepover. They're able to go to that house party if they're in high school and they're starting to do those things. They're able to, really just participate in things that are outside of their sport. They're going to allow them to be that balanced human being, because I know so many athletes that burnt out because they're put so much pressure on them to succeed early that they do what you said, Simon. They go, you know what? I'm done with sport. Actually, even though I'm really good at it, it's no longer enjoyable for me. That's one avenue that happens. But the other is sometimes that they end up being so introverted because they don't have that social experience in terms of just hanging out and learning to talk to the opposite sex, to talk to older kids, younger kids, and it's about balance for me.
Yeah. It's funny that you say like they don't talk. Like I have some of the funniest laughing moments ever when I watch some NHL players do interviews. I'm like, this is painful. Like you look in, like, yeah, like you look like you're in pain talking to this report. Like I understand they don't necessarily want to do it, but I'm like, this is awkward. Like this is painful. And even watching like their impromptu feed channels of like when they're supposed to be having fun with like puppies and things. I'm like, this is still awkward. Like, like I'm like, this is crazy. Yeah. Like just be a kid for sure.
For sure. So, I mean, Nicole, you work with youth, and working with youth is very important, obviously, because they're the next generation. But it also has its own set of challenges, such as the duty to report, which you mentioned earlier, when you see certain things happening to the youth. But I'm sure there are a lot of rewarding moments when you've helped a youth overcome those obstacles that they can't handle on their own. But what are some of the challenges that you specifically help youth with?
Yeah, a big one is just like finding their own voice. I think when you're a kid, obviously your parents, do pretty much everything for you from the time you wake up in the morning till you go to bed. And so it's really just allowing them to find their own autonomy and their own voice to say that they do like something or they don't like something. Or I had this sweet, very lovely kid that really gets stressed out on the drive to competitions because their parent really wants to talk to them about what are you going to do when you get to the competition? How's it going to go? Make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And they hate it. They said that out of the entire competition experience, that's the most stressful thing for them. That specific moment. It's not at the venue. It's not during the game. It's not during halftime. It's nothing. It is on the way to the game, talking with their parent for that 15 minutes. They hate that. And it's just allowing them to tell their parent, hey, can we just listen to music? Allowing a challenge is just getting a kid to feel comfortable to tell their parent what will allow them to enhance performance because they know what will. So giving them that voice, giving that autonomy for youth is pretty difficult and can be quite challenging depending on the age. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I work on with them all the time. It's not for parents listening. I'm not trying to defy you or anything like that. It's more just that kid knows what works for them and just allowing them to tell you. I think sometimes we think kids don't know what's going on or they don't need to be involved in that conversation or they're not old enough or, they're not smart enough yet. It's like, nah, they're smart enough. They just don't have the vocabulary maybe yet to tell you, but they listen, they understand, they interpret. They're much more intelligent than sometimes I think we give them credit for. And so it's bringing them into a lot of conversations and allowing them to voice their opinion is probably the biggest challenge that I can definitely think of.
I love that you said giving them their voice, because it's something that a lot of adults, regardless of what their coach, teacher, whatever their role is in dealing with youth, don't understand that youth have a voice that once you empower them to use, you'll be really surprised what some youth will tell you. I've had youth have opinions on politics, and viewpoints that like adults don't have. And sometimes they think outside of the box and they have some really good points that you're like, I don't think anyone's really ever thought of that.
Yeah, they say the funniest things and some things they say and that you think you literally, I've had sessions and after I chat with kids and I go home and I'm like, I think they're right. Not that I'm like, oh my God, what? Like
100%.
Yeah.
And Simon I don't know why, Simon, but you seem to me like a kid who would have been very opinionated.
You know what? Actually, I would actually say it was the opposite. I was very much just like, tell me what to do, tell me what to do, tell me what to do. And so it was almost like I was the opposite. But because of that, so I think this is almost like a good segue to this story that Nicole's telling about giving kids that voice and an option to kind of share. Because it's not that I wasn't given an opportunity. I just kind of was like, tell me, please, help. And my dad, being my coach, was so wonderful. They said, yeah, here you go. And all my coaches were like, yeah, here you go. But then I got to like the US and I was on my own. And like I had to be an adult and like feed myself, look after myself, practice on my own. I didn't have all these like support groups around me. And I was like, how does this go? And then like the response was, well, you figure it out. Like you're old enough. And I was like, well, I'm not sure how to figure it out. So I think oftentimes like the idea of like giving kids voices is so important, because like a lot of parents and coaches I see, especially working with younger groups, and Nicole can probably attest to this, we're like, here, take this, do this. I'm helping you, telling you what you need so you can avoid these mistakes. But like, we need to learn those mistakes. We need to like stumble along the way, because if we kind of avoid all those things, then you're like so dependent on, let's say, Nicole, how does it work? And at some point, Nicole can't tell you how everything works. Your parent can't tell you all the time. Your coach can't tell you. And so you need to like kind of figure things out on your own as well. So this interdependence comes to mind. It's just so important for human development, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. And for me, I get this image of like, starting off with 3, 4, 5-year-olds, and you see them on this physical leash sometimes when they're all walking from daycare to the park or whatever. There's 20 of them. We're all physically tied together and walking, you know what I mean? Yeah. But then there's like a metaphorical leash too that we put on kids, where we don't allow them that safety and that opportunity to actually escape the leash, and try stuff and make mistakes and learn on your own. And it's understanding that by actually giving them that slack to try things, that they are going to be then prepared for those future situations like you just talked about, Simon. Like, so for me, it's when you go on provincial tournaments and stuff, out of province, and a coach allowing you not just to always be micromanaging you as a group and we're going to do this together, we're going to do this together. There's going to be some free time for you guys. Go eat what you want, go do what you want, go play. If you want to go play some cards in a room together, it's that opportunity for them to actually learn. And then a lot of the times they'll actually come to you as a mental performance coach or as a coach or whatever, to be like, hey, I need help, rather than you forcing it down for them to actually be doing, which a lot of times has the opposite effect where they go, nah, I don't want to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it comes to like this balance, right? Like if you give them too much space and say, go do what you want, I don't care, then accidents might happen. And then like say sport related, you're on the leash because like you were responsible for them. So like I fully understand that like we need to we have a duty of care, we need to look after them. But at the same time, like micromanaging can also be problematic. So it's all about finding this balance. And so like day in and day out, you're like staying in like zone, and like you're constantly shifting one way or another and making sure, oh, I've just come out of this one. Oh, I've just come out of this one. Bring it back, bring it back, bring it back. And it's just, this stuff is tough. And like, that's why like Nicole and I talk about this day in and day out, because it's not a one single conversation and you're like, check, done. Never have to worry about this again. It's an ongoing conversation day in and day out.
100%.
Yeah,
And
when it comes,
yeah.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, in terms of like, not a parent, so I don't know yet. And, one day I might, and I'll be like, oh my God. But, I'm not an expert parent or anything like that. But but Simon does it as well as you, Mark. Like, we listen to kids for a living.
Mhm.
Like, we sit there and we just listen to what they actually have to say. And so we're not expert parents by any means, but like, we do listen to what they think about their relationships. And when it comes out in the wash, there's a lot of different theories about there for in terms of involvement of a parent in like interaction with their kids in sport. But like one of the more studied, or one that I have read a lot about, is like family system theory. And their big idea there is that it's not the type of involvement, it's the amount of it. So looking at like being over involved or under involved versus like that middle point. And so when it comes to like parent engagement in sport, it's more the amount that you're giving instead of the type, according to that theory. So it's quite interesting. And, no parent I've never come across, you can see like, you can group them, all these parents do this, all of them do this, and you can kind of group it, but every story is so different. Every parent-child communication relationship is so different, and it's so unique.
Definitely.
So it's very cool.
No, definitely. And, that ties well into our next point, Nicole, because when we chatted, prior to this podcast, you talked to me about these yellow flags, which you use. Could you tell me a little bit more about what you use those yellow flags for?
Yeah. My yellow flags are a little bit more on that side of like safeguarding athletes in sport and youth in sport, and looking at safe sport engagement. And so I have my metaphorical little yellow flags in my back pocket everywhere I go, everything I do. And if something just doesn't seem the way I think it should morally or ethically, or just doesn't really fit, I just put a little yellow flag in it. And I note that, hey, this thing is a little odd. And so I can give a couple examples, like words, like how people interact with each other and the words that they use is a really big one, especially that coach athlete, parent athlete and engagement or involvement. A big one is changes in relationships. So, okay, let's say kid on the sport, Susie and Anna are really good friends and they do everything together, but then you come in the next week and they're not together, they don't sit together. Put a little that's weird, put a little yellow flag in that. What about like how they even walk? They come in super confident one day, they're talking, they're funny, and then the next day not really. Little yellow flag in that. You actually brought this up even earlier about like, oh, the parents, the coaches cut off observation. I think there's a pro to that for sure, but I would put a little yellow flag in that for sure. I think any environment in which parents aren't allowed to come watch their kid in sport, yellow flag for sure. That's really weird. Coaches texting their athletes, especially underage, yellow, maybe even a red flag for me. Like, that's odd. there's so many little things like that where I hear things, see things, anything like that. And I just put a little yellow flag in that. And it's really all about the little things, because eventually you'll have maybe enough yellow flags come together and you're like, okay, like this might not be the environment. This is not an optimal environment.
Interesting. So it's really just keeping those tabs and not waiting until things are at the complete extreme before you're reacting. So again, to that point of being proactive and just being aware of what's happening before it gets to a critical point.
100%. And I think they come up anywhere at any time. And if you don't have your little yellow flags or your tab ready to keep open, like you might miss a lot of important things.
Sure. And I mean, that's really important because again, as we've said, it's not always about just their performance on the field that matters. It's all those factors off the field and, you know, the parents driving them and creating that environment that really allows them to feel like, okay, I can just focus on my game when I get there.
100%.
Interesting. Well, that ties really well into, you know, our next point with Simon here. We briefly touched on it earlier, but the correlation between physical health and mental health. And, you know, I think there's probably a lot of misconceptions in anything to do with mental health and mental performance where you're almost expected to be psychologists almost, you know what I mean? So Simon, you know, tell us a little bit about the correlation of that and really debunking that myth around that, you know, anyone who works in mental performance almost needs to have a psychology degree to understand. Like that's.
Yeah. So to be a certified mental performance consultant, you don't have to be a psychologist. You have to have like degree within like psychology. So like I have like my degrees in sports psychology, my master's and my PhD and my undergrad is in psychology. So I've done 10 years of training within psychology, but I'm not a psychologist because there are differences between the two. And that really, the difference between like psychologists, what they do, like a counseling psychologist, for instance, and certified mental consultants, is that if we look at athletes who are like mentally healthy, we can support them. If we have athletes who are like struggling a little bit, but aren't actually like dealing with like mental illness, we can support them as well. We can promote mental health. We just can't diagnose and treat mental illness. So that is like a clear distinction between what we can do and what we can't do. Those are like the main differences between like our roles and those roles of psychologists, counselors, social workers. Am I missing anyone? Medical doctors who have psychology training, psychiatrists. I think that's pretty much all of them, Nicole, isn't it?
Yeah. You're like, how many things? Yeah, no, you got it.
So when we talk about like physical health and mental health, like there is a correlation there in a sense that like as we take care of ourselves and we move, we get that physical activity, we engage in sport, whether it's participating in sport or whether it's just like engaging in physical activity. And that terms of broad term physical activity because it just basically means movement. And how much we get, it varies from person to person and age, gender, culture, so many different factors like influence that. But really there's a clear calculation here that we see that like physical activity is good for our mental health. And there's actually some research coming out, and I'm not an expert in this area, so like I'm gonna like point this out with a double check and like don't take me at face value. But there is actually some research coming out that like in terms of like treating individuals who have poor mental health or supporting individuals' mental illness, not all of them. So I want to make this very clear: like physical activity isn't a cure for everything, but physical activity can support individuals and be an effective treatment strategy for individuals with certain types of mental illness or with poor mental health.
And just to like pause there, it's like as simple as getting outside every day, right? Like, and not just sticking yourself in your room and actually getting some fresh air, which does all sorts of things to the body. Like, would you say it's as simple as that?
Fresh air, sunshine, a bit of movement. Like we all have desk jobs, right? And so like we know the feeling of like when you wake up in the morning and you're like, I have a deadline, and then you sit at your desk for like 10 hours straight, where basically all you do is get up to go to the bathroom and come back. That's the only movement you get. And maybe get a bite to eat if you don't forget. It doesn't feel great. And when you can like break up that same amount of work into like smaller chunks with like get 10-minute walks in the sun and sit outside and like take breaks and whatnot, it just has a different impact on our bodies. And so like it's a good point that I want to highlight here as well. This idea, it's not just physical activity is good for mental health. it's physical inactivity or like sedentary behavior. So the amount of sitting we do, there's actually more and more research coming out around the amount of sitting, the amount of sedentary behaviors we engage in on a daily basis actually has a detrimental effect on our mental health and also our physical health.
I think the best example for everybody during this was COVID, and when we were all stuck inside, we couldn't go, to malls, we couldn't go. And I think everyone's time indoors increased because there were so many barriers. You couldn't go to parks, you couldn't. And I think we saw globally everyone's mental health deteriorated.
Oh, yeah. Global depression and anxiety increased significantly, actually. There's some good research on it with some of my work in physical health for mental health charities. We're paired with the University of Toronto, and there's been some staggering, like quite large increases in global depression and anxiety since COVID. Definitely went on the rise due to that reason, for sure.
100%. I mean, I personally was diagnosed with depression during COVID, and I gained a lot of weight. I gained 18 pounds over COVID again because I wasn't outside as much, which meant I was closer to the fridge and the cupboards a lot more. So I was snacking a lot and eating away my feelings. And, so for me, it was all very real. And that's when I really understood. I'd always knew that, mental health was important, but I didn't actually have to address it until COVID really happened. And, family struggles are happening, personal struggle, insomnia got even worse because I'm on Zoom calls all day and night. And, the screen time really, I'd say almost octupled. Like I went from one Zoom call a week to every day you're doing 4 or 5 Zoom calls. And that had a negative effect on my mental health, which again, correlated to me gaining a lot of weight, not getting as much sleep, struggling with even just the simplest way I could put it is I lost my funness. You know what I mean? Where you're very lighthearted. When you go, even in an office setting, you're making jokes, you're talking about those funny things that happen. I got very serious during COVID, and I wasn't able to just be more relaxed because I was so hyper focused on everything. What are people thinking of me? And it had a negative effect until I sought out therapy. And it's ironic that therapy, one of the first things that they talked about when I started kind of laying it all out, everything that had happened, and they're like, you're not sleeping enough. You're not eating the right things. You're eating a lot, but you're not eating the right things. Because it's okay if you actually snack, but if you're eating, broccoli, celery, yada, yada, you're going to be okay rather than chips and popcorn and yada, yada. So it was sleep, diet. And as you just mentioned, how often are you going outside just for a walk or whatever? And then there was even can you get a standing desk? If you're going to be at your desk all day, can you get a standing desk?
Yeah.
So, and for me, I got to experience all of those layers of, what does my mental health do to my physical health?
Yeah, I think the opposite of that is actually also true in terms of high performance athletes. Sometimes too much involvement in sport and physical activity can be detrimental to your well-being in terms of what we talked about already, isolating yourself, not having other components of your life. I was the opposite spectrum that you were at, Marvin. When I had my peak depression, I was training my maximum amount. I was training 40, 50 hours a week, didn't do anything else. And I reached my rock bottom there. And because all I wanted to do was lie down and do nothing, and I couldn't. I didn't feel like I could. So there's definitely a sweet spot somewhere in the middle of our stories, for sure.
Definitely. I mean, and this next one is ironic because obviously your job is to support other people with their mental performance and their mental health. And in every single line of work, there's potential for burnout and exhaustion. So, Nicole and Simon, I'll start with Simon, how do you deal with that burnout? And sometimes we said it's not even just the physically having to work 4 to 6 hours or whatever. It's the leading up to the work, so how do you deal with that in your specifically in your line of work?
I laugh because I think the amount of times that Nicole and I sit down together to kind of talk about this topic, it's our line of work, working in sport. So it's not just it doesn't just impact us as NPCs, but it's just working in sport with a variety of different teams means your schedule is very irregular and unpredictable. And so I'll have days where I have 2 hours of work that day, direct time with athletes face to face and teams. That's not a lot of time, but one is at 7 a.m., one's at 8 p.m. And now the rest of the day, I'm sitting there going like, right, I'm thinking about the evening session, I'm planning, I'm practicing, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So I might only be technically like some people working today, but I am like, my mind is racing for that 12 hours and thinking and planning and organizing and not doing other things because I need to be thinking about this stuff. And so in terms of like burnout and like wearing myself out, like I need to very much working on like not doing those like 9, 10 p.m. calls anymore because that's just like unsustainable. But also the other piece is just like if I have a 3-hour time slot and I don't actually have to do anything, actually go and do something else. Like that's it. I'm done for 3 hours. I'm gonna go take the dog for a nice long walk. I'm gonna go hang out with friends. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. Whatever it might be, it doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It could be I'm gonna watch TV, but I'm gonna watch TV without thinking about work. And then okay, I have a session in an hour. Now it's like go mode. So it's just about setting those boundaries and switching off when I can switch off.
Anything to add, Nicole?
Yeah, I think I echo everything Simon just said as well. And for me, it's my phone, like not doom scrolling, although Simon and I have good conversations about doom scrolling too, and minimizing that. But in terms of like this past, Easter long weekend, I actually had 3 full days off and I was jazzed. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like 3 days off I haven't had in months. Like, this is sick. And then you forget that coaches and athletes have your phone number. And so then it's like, okay, I have 3 days off, but I've been getting calls and messages, and someone called me at 10:30 at night one night. And I was like, oh my God, do I not answer this? And it's setting boundaries for me, really, which is really hard for me to do.
Dang.
Really hard because you want people. I think we're all air quote people pleasers. Like, you want to make people feel better. You want them to be happy. You want to feel good. Like, we're givers. We feel that empathy. You want to help. And sometimes it's just being like a little bit selfish sometimes. Like, I am going to make myself feel better by saying no to this. It's not no to you, it's no to this. And for me, it's just exercising boundaries, which sometimes I still fail out. I failed out last night, but it's just trying to exercise it still daily, thinking about them, which is really hard to do for sure.
100%.
Yeah. And like,
I really struggled with this. Sorry, Simon. I struggled with this in my last role, honestly. Like, in ticketing for the Halifax Wanderers on top of doing the DEI work. Like, and this is a self-reflection. This isn't a criticism of the role or anything. It was my own inability to create those boundaries so that when I was getting, 40, 50 emails a day, especially leading up to the game day, when everyone starts to think about, hey, I need tickets for the game. Hey, what are the costs? Or is there group tickets? Is yada, yada. And, I'm getting them at all hours a day. And because of the nature of ticketing, everyone has a cell phone number in their email signature. And some people don't understand the boundaries of work to life. So the people see the number, they call me at 8 p.m. on a Friday evening, because to them, that's when it's relevant. I'm thinking about it now, so I'm going to call Marvin now. And I get these phone numbers that are unknown numbers. So to me, it could be a friend, it could be anybody, and I'm answering it, and people, hey, Marvin, I need tickets, yada. And I wouldn't have the boundary to be like, hey, email me and I'll get back to it tomorrow morning. But it was this own internal want to sell out every single game, So I'm like, if I don't sell this person right now, the nature of people buying tickets is if you don't get them, they might decide to do something else. So I would answer their question. I would help them with the ticket purchase. But then I enabled them. So the next time they need a ticket, they would do the same thing. They'd be like, well, he answered and I called last time, so I'm going to call him. So I put this own pressure on myself to answer every phone call, every email, try to get my inbox to 0 before I go to bed, because if I didn't, the next day would be at 200.
That's so relatable. If I see that little stupid, even one, I'm like, gotta get rid of it. Like, for no good reason whatsoever. I so relate to that.
So it's the boundaries are definitely great to have, both external with, whether it's coworkers or clients or athletes, but it's also internal to be like, sure, I could do this now, but is it in my best interest to do it right now, rather than to set the expectation that, listen, email me and I'll get to it. And sure, I might get to it after those 60 people who email me before you called, but that is what's fair. And that's what's fair to me, and making sure that I'm able to continue to do this role for many years and many days in a healthy way. So definitely relate with the boundaries. And it's something that, like I said, I struggle with, but something I think we're all working towards getting better at.
I think it's good that we're talking about it. Like, and I say we, and I like loop myself and Nicole into this. And the reason I say that it's important that like Nicole and I like talking about this is because a lot of our sessions with the teams we work with, we talk about this specific topic about switching up and not overdoing and all this kind of stuff. And because we talk about this day in and day out, people assume that like, well, you've got it all figured out. And like, geez, I wish I could say that. But like, this is like ongoing work. Like, this is ongoing work for like myself that like every single day, if I don't create a schedule and set boundaries and at those off times where I'm unavailable and all that kind of stuff, I might be looking at my phone at 6 a.m. replying to an email. I might be at my desk at 11 p.m. replying to an email. And it's only when I have that consistent schedule that I put the effort in ahead of time that I'm like making sure I'm protecting my mental health and all these kinds of things. But I just want to highlight that if anyone here like struggles with this stuff, we all do. Even people who are quote unquote experts in this field also struggle with these things.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really great point, Simon, and
Yeah, for sure.
it's something that's lost a lot, especially among the youth. They see their role models, they're the Tigers of the world, and they're like, "Yo, that guy's got it figured out. You know, he's winning PJ Tours, he's got the Nike deal, he's got the car deal, he's got really hot wife, yada yada," and they don't realize that behind closed doors, he's struggling maybe worse than any of us because of the spotlight that he has and the amount of followings and the pressures from his brand, from his team, from his own internal pressure, which is why they succeed so much. So it's really important to just understand that even our role models and our heroes, you know, the Tiger Woods and the Obamas and it doesn't matter what field they're in. We all struggle with our own things, and we're all trying to get better at dealing with our mental health and just that balance of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So the last point that I want to get into is, Nicole, you told me this Team Unbreakable that was really interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit on Team Unbreakable?
For sure. I always smile when I hear the name, because every time I tell Simon about it, he'll say Team Unbearable. And it just like always, it always just gives me a good giggle. But yeah, Team Unbreakable is a youth mental health charity that I do some work for in terms of outreach, but also content creation and management. And so it's a program. It's based out of Toronto, but we are expanding into other provinces. And it's focused on the reciprocal relationship between mental health and physical health. It was designed and it's evidence-based strategies, and it was evaluated by the Mental Health and Physical Activity Research Center at the University of Toronto. And our modules, we have content modules, and it's divided into physical health modules and mental health modules. And so the physical health modules are all about like how to train, how to run, how to fuel, how to energize, how to take cramps and setbacks. And then every week you would learn a new physical health module, but at the same time, you would learn a mental health module. And the mental health modules are just basic, things like goal setting or finding what your motivation is or building a community through running. And so each week you would do Team Unbreakable and you would pair a mental health with a physical health module. It's an 8-week program. And at the same time, you do about what we call a couch to 5K. And at the end of your 8 weeks of your training and program, you run a 5K as a community together. You put on a little run. It's super fun. It's super engaging, but it's really all about putting youth back in the driver's seat of their life and teaching them some better ways to gain confidence and have fun and connect with their community. It's all self and like taught. I like it's put in through communities or schools. So you do need a teacher or a community leader to lead it. You don't need to be a mental health professional. Wow, my gosh, this is hard. A mental health practitioner or a gym teacher or anything like that. All the content is there, evaluated and created for you. And it's quite a fun program to get involved with.
Awesome. Thank you. That sounds like a great initiative, and hopefully it comes to Atlantic Canada as well, because it sounds like a great initiative. One of the things, because this is in relation to a lot of coaches, and I want to bring this all back and kind of tie it in a bow for coaches who are listening. So we've talked a lot about the correlation between mental health and physical health. We've talked about the accountability piece around the community and creating a safe environment for both coaches, parents, refs, officials, you name it, to create that real safe sport environment. And we've talked about making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, regardless of what work we're in. And coaches, a lot of times it's a side gig, or you're doing it on top of your job. And, it's important to create those boundaries. But for coaches specifically, Simon, what responsibilities do they have that differ from the role of the parents in ensuring that safe environment that we've talked about in depth?
Wow, big question. What responsibilities do coaches have that differ from parents? And it's really just this idea of creating an environment that is, depending on the age group, like depending on the focus of the program, it might be more performance based, it might be more like just engagement based, like it depends what the motivations behind the programs. But just making sure that whatever motivation is, whether it's we're trying to become the next Olympians, or whether we're trying to like get as many people into sport as possible, whatever your motivation is, that program, just making sure it's done in like a safe and inclusive and accessible and like friendly way that doesn't exclude people and welcomes people. Like that would be like my, I guess, one-liner to kind of explain that in that sense.
Love that. And Nicole?
I think Simon always does it just with a good answer. For coaches, it comes down to like sometimes to your own morals, ethics, and values, right? Like really evaluate why you're there and why you want to be there and what you're going to give or take yourself from the sporting environment. Like think about the youth, practice a little extra empathy. We always say that joke about your friends are the people that you pick and your family isn't. Well, I use that same analogy sometimes for coaches, right? Like when you're a parent, not yet. We don't pick our kids. You have the kid essentially. But when you're a coach, sometimes you get to pick your team and you get to, go into the environment and that you get to create. And so taking that and having fun with it, but being safe at the same time, right? You have that power. There is a power dynamic and relationship between coach and athlete, the same as parent and athlete, the same as NPC and athlete. And so it's just realizing that you have that power. There is a strong power dynamic. And I remember, Marvin, we talked about this a while ago. Like I had that athlete who I asked whose thoughts are the most important after a game. And the options were yours or your parents. And he surprised me again. There's a secret option C that we didn't talk about. And option C was my coach's thoughts are the most important. And I was like, wow, like that's how much power some coaches have. And
Definitely.
Wouldn't it be great if you could use that power positively, right? You got kids out there thinking that your thoughts are more important than their own and their parents. Like that's crazy, right? But just like acknowledging that, like whether you think you have it or not, conscious or unconscious, like, kids think the world of you and they love going to sport, hopefully. So, just acknowledge that sometimes.
Definitely. I love that, Nicole. And honestly, anybody who knows me has heard this line many times, but quoting the classic Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So I think that's a great way of summarizing the responsibility we have as coaches. And for my own example, it was also sometimes stepping away. One of the first teams I coached after that U5 to U10 group that I had that I talked about before was girls U13, U14 team. And after a couple weeks of awkward conversations, hearing the kids talk about having crushes on me and periods and things that I was not experienced as an 18-year-old teenager myself, I removed myself. I said, I am not the right person to coach this team. And I recommend that you either hire a female or somebody who's a parent who understands this age group. And ultimately, that was the best thing that I could have done, was to actually walk away. So sometimes that is what you have to do. If you're not the right person, find somebody who is. And sometimes it's working in tandem with them or just letting them lead, because good leaders know when to follow as well. So thank you, Nicole and Simon. This has been incredible. And I think there's one piece to it that I want Simon to touch on, because in a world of podcasts and social media and everything, there's a lot of people who claim to be experts in fields that they actually have done no education, formal education, to become those self-proclaimed experts that they speak about so often. So for those people who are giving advice on mental health and whatnot, who are not as educated as you two are, Simon, what would you say to avoid?
What would I say to people seeking out support and who to reach out to?
Yeah, well, basically, it's like what not the people not to go to. The people who don't have
if you're looking for mental performance support specifically, I would always just recommend, if you're in Canada, go to the Canadian Sports Psychology Association. There's a directory, and you can see people listed in your province, in your area, in your region, who have the training. That for me is the first step. There are psychologists who are dually trained. They can be a psychologist and an MPC, and that's great as well. So it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for like specific like mental health support, then maybe start with psychologists, and you can like go onto like websites and like search for people and their specialties, and you can like what you're looking for. But if it's more mental performance support you're looking for, and you know that, go to the Canadian Sports Psychology Association and look through the directory there where you live.
That makes a lot of sense. And then for the coaches too, is there any sort of education offered through possibly NCCP or any other sources?
Yes. So there's two kind of streams that I would think of. One is reach out to our colleague Alison. Like if you want to learn more about coach resources, like she is fantastic and loves supporting coaches and has all the resources. And the other thing that I'll plug is Canadian Center for Mental Health and Sport recently created a workshop trilogy specifically for coaches on mental health, and it is amazing. I had the honor and privilege of being a learning facilitator for it. I take no credit for the creation of it. All I did was deliver it, and it is incredible. And huge shout out to Jen, who created it, and the CCMHS for delivering it, like organizing this whole project and running it. And yeah, so go to the Canadian Center for Mental Health and Sport, and you can find more information on those free workshops there.
Amazing. And you've given lots of tidbits throughout, but is there any closing statements, any just simple piece of advice for coaches?
Coaches are givers. I think as like many of us who work in sport care about giving. And so we need to recognize when giving becomes too much giving. And we need to if we don't look after ourselves, don't protect our own well-being and our own mental health, we can't look after others. The metaphor that comes to mind is when you're in an airplane and you see the security video, if you ever pay attention to them, it's always put on mask before you put on someone else's mask. And the idea is just that if you can't look after yourself, if you're struggling, point that you can't really function, you're not going to be able to inspire others to want to look after themselves. So you need to look after yourself first in order to be able to look after others.
Love that. It can't fill from an empty cup, as they say. And Nicole?
I think where we kind of started at the beginning, let the kids be kids, I think is just all I really want to drive home. If your son, daughter, whoever, brother, sister, anybody, if they go to their place of sport and you don't see them smile once, think about it for sure. Yeah, thank you. It's a yellow flag for sure. Yeah, 100%.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you joining. There's lots of great information that I'll be sharing with not just my team and other coaches that I know, but anybody listening too. Share it to those in your, whether there's parents that you think maybe need to listen to this, whether there's other coaches, there's athletes who maybe really need to listen to this, because even though the podcast is Coach's Idea, this is for everyone in sport. So please get the message out there. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please give us 5 stars. And ultimately, thanks, Nicole and Simon, for joining me on this episode of Coach's Idea podcast. Until next time, keep those ideas in mind.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
My words feeling like a taste of freedom, a glimpse of hope for anybody who may just need them. I hope you feel heaven falling out the sky. You ain't crazy, you about to fly. I'm running in place, training my mind.